Welcome to VSOW. Today we're going to really dig into this whole Hotep thing. It's a term that gets thrown around a lot, and there's all this baggage that comes with it. Our mission today is to really unpack what it means, where it comes from, and how it's evolved over time. And we've got some really fascinating sources to guide us through this deep dive.
Yeah, it's like right off the bat, you notice how Hotep is almost like this easy target. The guy on Lil Bill called it a pseudoscience punching bag, which I thought was pretty spot on. You just see it all the time online, these social media threads where people just jump in with these knee-jerk reactions. Like nobody's really taking the time to understand what's actually going on beneath the surface.
It's true. There's not a lot of deep thinking happening in those exchanges. It's all very surface level. And as the Lil Bill video explains, the original meaning of Hotep, like way back in ancient Egypt, was actually to be at peace. It's kind of wild to think about how it went from this peaceful greeting to what it's become today. And we can't forget how Afrocentric Black nationalists were using it back in the late 80s and 90s.
It's all about context, right? Like if you think about what was happening back then, particularly with how African history was being taught, or rather not taught, in the U.S., it starts to make sense why there was this turn towards Egyptian iconography as a source of Black pride. The Little Bill video mentions how a lot of the focus in history classes was on stuff where white people were the main players, and that left a huge gap for a lot of Black folk who were looking for their own history. And Egypt, I mean, it's undeniable. The history, the grandeur, it's all right there in Africa. So it kind of naturally became this point of reference for Black folks seeking that historical connection.
And then things take a turn, right? Like fast forward to the early 2010s, and Hotep starts to get this whole new meaning. Now it's being used to label people who are seen as, and I'm quoting the source here, low-key problematic. It's this whole association with pseudo-intellectualism, this rejection of mainstream knowledge. And the Lil Bill video links this to some interesting trends, like people promoting certain oils, dietary stuff like avoiding bacon, and even fashion choices like those hats and those non-prescription glasses.
And it's fascinating how the Lil Bill presenter pinpoints Umar Johnson as this kind of key figure in the shift towards Hotep being a negative term. Like he had this huge online presence and there was all this controversy surrounding him. And it really seems like that was a turning point. And then you have the emergence of this Hotep influencer archetype, which, as the presenter suggests, made it almost too easy to link people like Kyrie Irving and Kanye West in with that label when they started saying things that went against the grain. What do you think it was about their rhetoric or their online persona that made people make that connection?
I think Hotep became this easy label, the shorthand way to kind of dismiss anyone expressing ideas that were a little outside the norm, especially those ideas had anything to do with Afrocentrism. It's like what the Lil Bill guy said. Hotep became the Black community's version of woke for like the last 15 years.
Yeah.
It's a term that gets thrown around as a put down, but without really understanding what's behind it.
And that's where the whole diversity of thought under this umbrella term comes in. You can't talk about Hotepism like it's this one fixed, rigid ideology. It's way more fluid than that, like Black nationalism, which is, pretty closely connected.
Totally. And it's interesting how Lil Bill brings up these examples of Black rappers like Nas, Jay-Z, and Kendrick Lamar. You could definitely argue that they've had some Hotep-leaning ideas in their music even before they hit it big. It kind of challenges this simple idea of who fits this label, right?
Absolutely. And it's not just musicians either. Think about comedians like Paul Mooney and Dave Chappelle, who, by the way, identifies as Muslim. According to our sources, they've also expressed ideas that you could consider Hotep adjacent. It shows how this term captures a certain cultural or philosophical vibe without necessarily being tied to a strict set of beliefs.
And I think it's really important what Lil Bill says about Hotepism not being just a male thing. It's so easy to fall into that trap, especially when the image that comes to mind is often very male-centered. But then you have figures like Lauryn Hill and Erykah Badu with their emphasis on spirituality, and their sometimes unconventional takes on Black feminist identity politics. They fit a certain archetype that's often associated with the term.
The range of beliefs under this label is actually pretty mind-blowing. You've got religious folks, atheists, agnostics, and even people with totally different views on things that seem completely unrelated to Black identity, like the flat earth theory. It just goes to show that there's no one-size-fits-all definition of what it means to be Hotep.
But there does seem to be this common thread, at least initially. As Lil Bill explains, the unifying factor was this tendency to embrace some form of black nationalism, but in a way that wasn't necessarily rooted in academic scholarship. It's more about relying on non-scholarly sources to fill in the gaps in their understanding of history. It points to a more grassroots, less formally educated way of engaging with ideas about black identity and empowerment.
Which brings us to the core of it all, right? Black nationalism. As the Little Bill video explains, it's the idea that people of African descent make up a separate and distinct identity within these racially structured societies. And with that comes the inherent right to self-determination and representation.
And the ways to achieve that self-determination, they're all over the map. The presenter himself is a big advocate for cultural sovereignty, this nation within a nation concept. He's pretty critical of the idea of integration being the sole goal of black liberation movements.
It's crucial to remember that black nationalist thought has been around for a long time, like way before Hotep became a thing. As the source highlights, it's a tradition that goes all the way back to the very beginnings of the U.S. You see it in slave revolts, in the creation of maroon communities, in the origins of Carnival, and of course in the Haitian Revolution, which was a monumental event. Understanding this historical context is key to grasping the many different ways black identity and self-determination have manifested throughout history.
Well, Bill makes this really important point about the essence of it all. The creation and preservation of black identity as defined by black people themselves. It's about reclaiming what was taken away, especially after the historical erasure of their ancestral identity. And the video gives props to figures like Martin Delany as early pioneers in articulating this vision of black nationalism.
Now, when you look at the influences that have shaped how Hotepism is understood today, the Lil Bill video points to this interesting intersection of ideas from the Nation of Islam, the Moorish Science Temple, and the legacy of Marcus Garvey. Each of these movements has its own distinct contribution to the mix.
Let's break them down. First, you have the Moorish Science Temple, which was founded by Noble Drew Ali. Their central teaching was that black people descended from the ancient Moabites and identified dark-skinned people as having Asiatic roots. They offered a unique historical and religious framework for understanding black identity.
Then you have the Nation of Islam, established by Wallace Fard Muhammad. They blended elements from the Moorish Science Temple, Garveyism, and even some ideas that resemble Christianity but with their own unique twist. One of their core beliefs was that black people were the original inhabitants of Earth and that white people were created later.
And let's not forget about Marcus Garvey. He was all about Pan-Africanism and the Back to Africa movement. His vision was to create a strong sense of black identity that was completely independent of white supremacy. He was a huge advocate for black economic empowerment through black-owned businesses.
And this is where it gets really interesting, because the Lil Bill video points out how Louis Farrakhan's leadership of the Nation of Islam has been a major source of the pseudo-spiritualism, and let's be real, the misogyny, homophobia, and anti-Semitism that have become attached to the more problematic interpretations of Hotep. This link is really crucial to understanding why the term has picked up such negative connotations for so many people.
So where does Hotepism fit in with the Black Power movement of the 60s and 70s? Well, the Lil Bill presenter suggests there's some overlap. Both share this critique of mainstream societal norms, this commitment to redefining black identity outside the framework of white supremacy, and a real focus on the needs of the working class and those who are marginalized within black communities.
But there are some key differences too. While Black Power definitely had spiritual elements, it wasn't a religious movement in the same sense as the Nation of Islam. Their goals were also distinct. Black Power had a much broader agenda than the NOI's focus on achieving a kind of patriarchal privilege for black men that mirrored the privilege white men held in society.
And then there's the big question of how Hotep went from a positive term to a negative one. The Lil Bill video points out that by the mid to late 80s, the energy of the Black Power movement had faded, and the media was pushing this very narrow, often assimilationist vision of black identity centered on respectability politics.
And at the same time, those more radical black ideologies were being trivialized or just plain ignored by the mainstream. The FD Signifier video picks up on this shift too, talking about how Hotep, which started out as a genuine greeting of peace in certain Afrocentric circles, was twisted into this dismissive label.
According to FD Signifier, most of this shift happened online, specifically within black social media spaces in the 2010s. It was right around the time when figures like Umar Johnson and Tariq Nasheed were gaining more visibility, and their rhetoric, which was often pretty sensational and controversial, became tied to the term Hotep.
The presenter in FD Signifier makes a strong argument that the term's meaning expanded to the point where it was being used to shut down any kind of pro-black radical thought or even just any pro-black sentiment. It was like this easy way out for people who didn't want to actually engage with the ideas.
It's messed up because even some black intellectuals and activists have contributed to Hotep being used as a put-down, as FD Signifier points out. It's almost like they were trying to distance themselves from what they saw as the more extreme or irrational ideas within the Afrocentric world.
FD Signifier also calls out this recurring trope in black media, where black militants, or anyone who's into Afrocentrism, is portrayed as either a joke or a con artist. This kind of representation just feeds those negative stereotypes and makes it so much easier to write off their ideas without even trying to understand them.
The Lil Bill video goes even further, laying some of the blame for the rise of Hotepism at the feet of the black middle and upper classes. The presenter argues that they haven't done enough to connect with and support the working class and the underclass, leaving a void that groups like the Nation of Islam stepped in to fill. They became the dominant voice of black nationalism in those communities because no one else was really stepping up.
And the way he frames Hotepism as this indictment of the people who are so quick to diss it is really something to think about. It suggests that there's a real lack of solidarity between different socioeconomic groups within the black community. It's like the needs and concerns of the working class are being ignored or dismissed.
The FD Signifier video makes a really important point. You can't truly understand Hotep without understanding the history and the wide range of ideas that make up black radical thought. This is a tradition that includes giants like W.E.B. Du Bois, Marcus Garvey, Malcolm X, Frantz Fanon, and Angela Davis, all these thinkers who've challenged systemic anti-blackness and pushed for real change.
And as the presenter points out, a lot of these incredibly important figures are wrongly lumped into this overly simplistic, often negative Hotep category by people who don't even bother to learn about their actual ideas and the work they did.
The FD Signifier video also breaks down some key schools of thought within black radicalism: Pan-Africanism, Afrocentricity, and Afrocentrism. They all share some common ground, like emphasizing the importance of African heritage, but they also have their own distinct characteristics and goals.
One that stands out is revolutionary Pan-Africanism. It's explicitly linked to leftist and socialist ideologies, advocating for a unified African continent and criticizing both capitalism and imperialism. That sets it apart from other forms of black radical thought that might not share that specific political and economic analysis.
Then you have Afrocentricity, as defined by Malefia Sante and discussed in FD Signifier. It's presented as a serious academic theory that puts African perspectives and agency at the center of history, culture, and society. It's a direct challenge to the dominance of a Western or Eurocentric way of looking at the world.
Afrocentrism, on the other hand, is more a broader cultural movement that takes inspiration from both Pan-Africanism and Afrocentricity. The presenter argues that because it's not as strict about academic methods and hard evidence, it's more susceptible to including ideas and beliefs that might not be grounded in solid research.
And that brings us to the problematic side of Hotep. The FD Signifier video traces the development of these regressive and, frankly, reactionary ideologies that have popped up within certain parts of the Afrocentric and Afrocentrist movements. They've contributed to this negative Hotep caricature that's so widespread today.
The video uses the example of cult leaders like Yahweh bin Yahweh and Malachi York, who emerged within these alternative black thought spaces, to illustrate how harmful and just plain irrational belief systems can take root and gain a following. It's a cautionary tale about how things can go wrong.
FD Signifier also points to the role that social media played in all this. You know, how the whole commercialized nature of social media in the 2010s with all the algorithms and the drive for clicks amplified this outrageous Hotep content through rage bait. It just fed the beast.
And the presenter makes this crucial observation about the failure to separate the legitimate, well-established ideas of black radical thought from this nonsensical, often harmful Hotep caricature. It's created this huge obstacle to having any kind of meaningful conversation about these issues.
But we also have to acknowledge, as both Lil Bill and FD Signifier do, that movements connected to Hotepism have done some good in the past. They've provided resources and a sense of community for a lot of black people. The Nation of Islam's community outreach and social programs are a good example of that.
These movements tend to resonate with people who feel like they're on the margins, like they've been shut out by the dominant culture. They offer a sense of belonging, a sense of purpose, and a way to make sense of the world and their place in it.
Figures like Ron Karenga, also known as Malana Karenga, the guy who created Kwanzaa and founded the U.S. organization, are perfect examples of how complicated and contradictory Afrocentrism can be. As the FD signifier video shows, he's done some positive things culturally, but he's also been associated with some really problematic, even violent stuff.
Both presenters agree on one thing. We got to stop with the easy dismissals and the ridicule of Hotep and start engaging with the history, the ideas, and the complexities with more nuance and a willingness to understand.
As the FD signifier video emphasizes, we need to understand where Black radical thought comes from and the differences between its various strands. That's how we can tell the real deal from the distortions and the caricatures.
The call to action is clear. Let's reclaim the core principles of Black radical thought, but reject the harmful distortions. Let's educate ourselves and our communities and organize to counter these harmful narratives.
So there you have it, our deep dive into the world of Hotep. We hope this conversation has given you a better understanding of how the term has evolved, its connection to Black nationalism and radical thought, and why it's so often misunderstood and controversial.
Keep exploring. There's so much to learn from Black intellectual history. Engage with the different viewpoints, the movements, the thinkers. It's all part of the journey.
If you found this deep dive insightful, hit that subscribe button, give us a like, and leave a comment below. Let us know what you think. Thank you for listening to VSOW.